1 year ago, the Canadian national team reached its peak. They finished first in North American qualifying for the World Cup, and despite a poor showing at the tournament, they reached their first World Cup in 36 years, and they wouldn't have to wait long for their next one as they'd be hosting the next World Cup, having already qualified. And they had a good young core to build around, including Alphonso Davies, one of the world's best left backs and the entire region's best player. But here we are just a year in the future, and they just lost to Jamaica, failing to qualify for the Copa America. I don't want to insult a decent Jamaica team, but they were missing their best player, and this is a game that Canada should have easily won. They'll probably still eventually reach the Copa America through a consolation game, but at this point, the writing's on the wall. This is an unserious team. This is only the culmination of a litany of terrible moments that have chiefly come at the top of Canadian soccer. And to start, we're going to have to go back to the preparation to the World Cup that went so poorly, the June 2022 window, a window that is crucial to preparing for the World Cup. In that window, they had multiple friendlies cancelled. They couldn't even play them. One of which involved the players just going on strike, protesting their own federation. They want some issues resolved, including better pay for the women's team, who are world champions, by the way, changes in leadership, and clarity on a deal with a group called Canada Soccer Business, which appears to be getting all of the money Canadian soccer earns in endorsements and not putting it back into Canadian soccer. The team only protested for the one friendly, but it should speak volumes that they used the spotlight on them from qualifying for the World Cup to shed a light on how bad the Canadian Soccer Federation was. And these issues were far from resolved. You see the women's team threatened to strike ahead of the 2023 Women's World Cup as well. And by the way, this is just one of the games that got cancelled. The other friendly was cancelled for political reasons, as Canadian soccer scheduled a game against Iran. Now personally, I'm not somebody who's critical of Russia being excluded from FIFA, or even Indonesia refusing to host the U20 World Cup, so fair play to the Canadian public. But how dumb do you have to be as a federation to schedule a game in this crucial window that you know would face this much backlash? I just want to drive it clear how bad this federation is. They didn't even have new jerseys prepared for the Canadian team, as they didn't think they'd actually qualify for the World Cup, so they end up being the only team in the tournament to not get new kits. Moving along the timeline, in November, they have a bad World Cup in normal kits, partially at least caused by the federation hamstringing the preparation. But they're still hosting the next World Cup and have a good young core to build around, so they get to work preparing for the next World Cup. To start with, they have the Nations League, and Canada has actually a very good run going all the way to the final in June, where they only lost to the US because they had a competent coach this time, which they won't have in the near future. After that, they have a run in the Gold Cup. Doesn't go great, but the Gold Cup's not a real tournament, so I'll skip it. And then they have the September friendlies. Right? You have September friendlies. I mean, it's an international window. Well, not if you're Canadian soccer, because the Federation couldn't secure funding for friendlies. When I heard that, I know my first thought was, wait, don't friendlies generate revenue? Well, not if you have a weird deal with Canada Soccer Business. Can I tell you about that deal? No, because remember, the players were striking for transparency in the deal, and they did not get it. I think that some of the money's going to the Canadian Premier League, and that's good to have. I mean, it's good for Canadian players to have ways to develop that aren't the NCAA or MLS, but you can't be taking this much money away from the Federation to do it. And speaking of player development, obviously, they haven't been able to hold too many youth camps, which has led to terrible showings by the U20 and U17 teams. This deal with Canadian Soccer Business is hurting Canadian soccer so much. And if this all sounds like it's too much to handle, you'd be in agreement with John Herdman, because Canada's manager decided to walk away from the team. The manager who had guided Canada from a mediocre CONCACAF team to a World Cup squad, who if you count his time with the women's team had been with Canada for 12 years. He got fed up and left due to all the shenanigans that are going on. And to make things worse, he didn't even leave Canada. He's the coach of Toronto FC. He said to the Canadian people, it's not you, it's them. And this is so disappointing for a team that appeared to be on the rise. It appeared that the future was only bright, but now they probably wouldn't even qualify for the next World Cup if they weren't the hosts. And this is a team that has talent. Alphonso Davies is one of the world's best left backs. He used to say he was the best, but dang, Grimaldo's in good form. But he's an elite player to work around. And then you have one of the top young strikers in the world in Jonathan David. For a while, I was considering just saying they had the two best players in CONCACAF. I don't think I'd go that far, but you could certainly make the argument he's going to be a top player one day. With players like Larin, Estacio, Buchanan, Kone, Johnston, they've got a decent core to work around. It isn't just a two-man team. But because of the Federation's shenanigans, This team has hit a wall. And the Federation also hampers this team actually improving its player pool. Firstly, they do a terrible job recruiting dual nationals, which Canada has a lot of. First example is Luca Koleosho, the Burnley winger. They actually were able to bring him in for a window to play in some friendlies. Which friendlies? Oh, the ones that got cancelled in June. So he got to see a labor strike and a game canceled due to political reasons. That's not even getting into some of the other dual nationals that they failed to recruit, like Tamore, and geez, then there's the entire Owen Hargraves rabbit hole. And there aren't any top homegrown talents coming through. Marshall Ruddy is probably the best of him, but I'm not sure how good he'll end up being. And the U17 World Cup didn't produce any standouts. Maybe somebody on the lines of Tahid, Chukwu, Stefanovic, they'll end up being alright, but they're nowhere near the level of prospect that Alphonso Davies or Jonathan David were. And with lack of funding for youth national teams, player development will only continue to stagnate. And even if they do luck into producing a really good player, with lack of Canadian youth national team appearances, they'll probably just end up getting recruited away by somebody like England, like Hargraves or Tamore were. Now, I'm sure Canada will continue to produce good players. They've had a knack for doing this even before they had professional academies, and now they have some good MLS academies, and the Canadian Premier League's on the rise as well. But a lot of these players will just end up being like Moise Bombito, somebody who had to work through junior college and the NCAA and only became professional at the age of 23. And if they don't work out all of these player development problems, and if they don't have players coming out of academies at a young age, then player development will only continue to get worse, and they're not getting better right now. So here we are in November of 2023, a team that 1 year ago looked like it was on the rise and could really make some noise at the next World Cup. Sit without a coach, without games, and a federation that is actively hamstringing any further progress. A team that, despite having the best player in the region, arguably the two best, couldn't be one of the four best teams to qualify for the Copa America. And if they're even able to beat a CONCACAF minnow to qualify for the tournament, I have no reason to suspect that the Copa America will go any better than the World Cup. Canada's soccer has fallen from grace. And yeah, that's all I got to talk about. If you want a more positive version of a national team story, some good videos on Belgium and Norway you could look at. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. See ya.